Our last speaker, but not the very last, I guess, is Philip Spindle, and is it French or English? And he forms part of this long list of delegations from Brussels. Yeah, Philip's worked a lot with Thibaut Damour, who was here last year, and I think he works extensively in gravitation. Correct me if I'm wrong. So when you're ready, just start.
Yes, as I say, I knew Robert for more than 40 years, so I would deeply thank the organizer to give me the opportunity to speak during this memorial conference. What I will present you is work that I've developed this last year with mainly with Thibaut Damour in IHS in France that concern quantization of gravity near the singularity, near the Big Bang singularity, and a quest for hidden symmetry. So let's make contact with the main theme of this conference. Hidden symmetry known as Kac-Moody symmetries. Here is the summary of my talk, some motivation, then a brief summary of the talk, and then I will go a little bit more into the details, but don't be afraid, I will just give you the flavor of different points. I will describe the model, the various degree of freedom involved in the model, and then once I have obtained the equation of the dynamics, I will describe the solution and then the conclusion and link with Robert's vision about the quantum structure of our universe. So, as I already said, concerning motivation, the birth of the universe seems to be of quantum nature. And near the cosmological singularity, the evolution of the universe decoupled. We could see that from causality, and so we could restrict ourselves just to time evolution and see the complete evolution of the universe as a lot of Bianchi model, homogeneous cosmological model built on the SU2 group or SO21 group that evolve independently in a chaotic way. The origin of this idea is old. It goes to the 70s with the seminal work of Belinsky, Kalatnikov, and Lifshitz, and also independently of Misner. The motivation about that is that the singularity are generic in general relativity. So what I say will not only be valid near the cosmological singularity, but we could expect it also to be valid near, for instance, black hole singularity. And what we will say is that this chaotic motion is related to a reflection group, a Coxeter group, reflection group on the wall of Biard, and this Biard is actually the equivalent to the reflection on the wall of a Weil chamber for a hyperbolic Coxeter group, a crystallography group. Another reason is that I often discuss cosmology with Robert. As you see, use good book. And as Sasha said, indeed, Robert has read this book and also discussed it a lot. More seriously, maybe other reason to look at this model is the mathematical simplicity, of course. We reduce a very complicated problem of quantizing gravity to a simple one that involves only a finite number of degrees of freedom, and is actually a quantum mechanical problem. And a lot of work has been devoted to the subject, but they seems to be incomplete. And indeed, what we have used, Thibault and myself, is a new approach to quantize the system, the supergravity system, where we treat the Rarita-Schwinger field as a fully quantum fermionic operator instead of a Grassmann variable, and also take into account all the nonlinearities of the fermions that supergravity requires to exist. And it is in this framework that I will put into evidence the hyperbolic Kac-Moody structure that is hidden in n equal 1, d equal 4 supergravity. What we prove is that the Lagrangian of supergravity of n equal 1, d equal 4 supergravity reduced on the SU2 group is, as I told you, a quantum mechanical problem that is well posed. Indeed, we could quantize it a la Dirac, and we obtain a set of equations related to the constraint, the supersymmetric constraint, SA, and the diffeomorphism, the time and space diffeomorphism, H and HI. And this operator constitute a coherent system of equations in the sense that the commutation or anti-commutation relation that I have written could be written in such a way that on the right we recover the S and H operators, so that ensure the coherence of the system of equation. It was not obvious, and it was a difficult part of the work to find the correct ordering of all this operator, but we find it, and then we proved actually that it was unique. And once the set of equation has been obtained, we could analyze the solution space of them, and what we obtain is that the solution space is a Hilbert space of a spinning particle moving in a 2+1 fat Minkowski space. The coordinates of this Minkowski space actually are not the usual t, x, and y, but they correspond to the scale factor of the metric. And this spinning particle is a 64-dimensional spinner corresponding to the Clifford group spin 8-4. And also that the algebra of the operator involved in the problem are directly linked to the A3, the rank 3 hyperbolic Kac-Moody algebra. And we also obtain a kind of spinorial extension of its Weil group. Okay, so that's the summary of what we have done. Now I go a little bit more into the details. The starting point was the Rarita-Schwinger Lagrangian. Notice that it involves two connections, omega dot and omega, and Einstein-Hilbert Lagrangian, written in terms of the connection, the Riemann tensor expressed in terms of the full connection, omega. What's the difference between these two connections? Omega dot is the usual Levi-Civita connection, but the other one involves a torsion term that is quadratic in the spinorial in the Rarita-Schwinger field. So the total Lagrangian could be rewritten in terms of the Levi-Civita connection, R naught and the Rarita-Schwinger term limited to the Levi-Civita connection, plus extra p's that involve the square of the torsion operator, and that's the quartic term in the fermion field that we have taken into account in all the calculation. So that's what I have said. We will use the problem on the SU2 homogeneous cosmological model. The bosonic degrees of freedom are the metric component, the lapse N and the shift NA, and also the 3x3 matrices GAB, that is the space matrix of the full space-time metric. The tau are the usual left invariant form on SU2 or on S3 as you want. To obtain the more tractable degrees of freedom, we express the space metric in terms of its eigenvalue, exponential of -2 beta, and the rotation matrix S that align the matrices GAB in its diagonal forms. That provides 6 degrees of freedom. The scale factor, beta A, the colloq of the squashing factor of the 3 sphere, the SU2 group, and the Euler angle that defines the rotation. We also introduce a Vierbein, that's the usual one, in terms of that depends on the lapse shift and all the gravitational degrees of freedom. And we redefine the Rarita-Schwinger in a quite unusual way. As you see, we introduce that phi A, small a, component that are related to the initial Rarita-Schwinger component by multiplying them by a gamma matrices, but without sum. And in this way, what we obtain for the kinetic part of the Rarita-Schwinger Lagrangian is this GAB phi A phi dot B. The GAB, the matrix is GAB is the first indication of hidden structure. It's related to the Kac-Moody IA3 algebra, as I will show you in a few minutes. It remains, that's just a set of 12 spinorial degrees of freedom. There remain 4 of them that are just the Lagrange multiplier that will imply the constraint equation of invariance with respect to the supersymmetry. So the main idea of this is that near the singularity, the evolution of the universe is like a motion of a spinning particle in an appropriate, in this case, three-dimensional hyperbolic Biard. And this Biard is obtained from the walls of the Weil chamber of the Wood space of an appropriate Kac-Moody algebra. This idea goes back to the work of Damour and Hainaut in 2001, and a lot of work, a very huge number of papers has been devoted on the subject. Behind that is that the idea that there is a duality between supergravity or even M theory and maybe quantum dynamics of a massless spinning particle on an appropriate Coset space, this Coset space being built from the group defined by the Kac-Moody algebra. Even if the notion of group associated to Kac-Moody algebra is not completely clear, let's say the formal group obtained by the exponentiating the generator of the Kac-Moody algebra. And that is the gravity Coset conjecture of Damour, Hainaut, and Nicolai. And what I could recommend you if you are interested in the problem is the pedagogical reviews, mainly the recent book of Belinsky and Hainaut, which is, I think, quite readable and also very precise and give you a lot of information on the conjecture. So to obtain the equation of motion, we start from the action written in Hamiltonian forms. And in this action, in particular, the kinetic part of three of the gravitational degrees of freedom involve the same matrices as the one that define the kinetic part of the Rarita-Schwinger field. That's not a coincidence. And from the variation of the action with respect to the psi dot, the lapse and the shift, you obtain the constraint equation that classically are equation SA, H, and HA equal to 0. Now to quantize the problem, we have the beta that becomes operator and the conjugate momenta, P obtained, defined by 1 over I, the derivative to beta, the Euler angle and the conjugate momentum. And for the fermionic degrees of freedom, they have to satisfy anti-commutation relation. And this is the origin of this spin 8-4 algebra that I mentioned. Indeed, there's a anti-commutation relation are just the Clifford algebra of spin 8-4. So the wave function of the universe in this problem will be a 64-dimensional spinor, and the gravity operator, the phi, acting on them as gamma matrices with quotation mark as 64 by 64 gamma matrices. And as I already told you, there is a unique Hermitian ordering of the various operators such that they obtain Hamiltonian and SUSY generator operator that satisfy the relation that's written there. It's a kind of a soft algebra. They also are coherent with respect to when we look at the commutator of the SUSY generator and the Hamiltonian. And so what we have to solve is this set of 8 equations. I remind you that each equation is a 64 by 64 partial differential equation. The psi is a 64 component object. And the simplest one to solve are the invariants with respect to the space diffeomorphism. They just tell you that the wave function of the universe is a kind of spin 0 wave function. It didn't depend on the Euler angles. It just depends on the 3 scale factor beta. Then the SUSY operator is something quite complicated. The details are absolutely not important. What we have to see is the structure. There are things linear in the fermionic operator, that's 2, and objects that are cubic, this one for instance, and this one. And these objects involve operator S12 that constitute actually a SU2 subalgebra. They are linked to the difference of beta 1, 2, it's beta 1 minus beta 2, to the difference of the gravitational, to the scale factor, and also this term also involves the scale factor, and for some reason that will become clear soon, these one are called gravitational term, and this one symmetry term. In the same way, the complete Hamiltonian, the generator of time translation, can be decomposed in a rotational part that involves the momenta conjugate to the Euler angle, and an Hamiltonian, a quadratic Hamiltonian that looks like a Klein-Gordon Hamiltonian coupled to an external field A that involves also a mass term and a potential term. The vector field that's coupled to in this Hamiltonian is a pure gauge potential, and the mass term, I will say something about it later. Let's look at the potential W that also split into 3 parts. one that depends only on the scale factor. It's purely bosonic and involve what is called a gravitational wall. And two parts that involve the fermionic degrees of freedom and introduce new operator, one that is quadratic, the G11, G22, G33 are object quadratic in the fermionic field, and the next one, which is quartic. There's also an operator that satisfies some precise commutation relation with the S, and what we will see is that this commutation relation corresponds actually to the compact part of Kac-Moody subalgebra. Okay, to go in the structure of the solution space, we have to introduce a kind of a chiral decomposition of the Rarita-Schwinger field, then the SUSY generator, which are the main equation. Once we have solution of S psi equal to 0, all the other equations are automatically satisfied thanks to the anti-commutation relation, is a kind of Dirac equation, the first order equation, d over d beta, plus potential term, and also this term that are involved in this representation, let's say 64 by 64 gamma matrices, linear and cubic. And on this 64-dimensional space, I could introduce a kind of fermionic number, quadratic into the B, and this number will also play an important role in the structure of the solution space, and it's also linked to some hidden symmetry to the Kac-Moody generator. So to obtain solution, we have to solve this simultaneous 4 Dirac-like equation, but the fermionic number I just introduced satisfies this commutation relation with the SUSY generator. So I could split the problem actually in some subspace instead of having to work on the full 64-dimensional space. The first point is that there exists a unique lower state, a 64-dimensional vector space that is annihilated by 6 of the fermionic generator that has fermionic level 0. And from this unique lower state, I will build all the solution of the Wheeler-de Wit and SUSY constraint equation. Indeed, A is the splitting of the solution space. At level 0, there is just one, let's say, eigenstate, psi dot. Then at level 1, in terms of the fermionic number, I obtain it by acting on it with one creation fermionic operator. So that gives me a 6-dimensional space. At level 2, I have to consider this 6 operator and take an antisymmetric combination of them that give us a 15-dimensional space that could be split into 6 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 according to the symmetry of the various operators. And we continue. At level 3, it's a 20-dimensional subspace. Then again, at level 4, 5, and 6, the number decreases. And at the top, there is again just one dimensional space obtained by acting with all the 6 different creation fermionic operators. Here are some explicit solutions. I just showed them to illustrate a non-trivial fact that this equation actually admit solution, and there's a complete solution at level 0. There is nothing arbitrary except that the prefactor. And the solution differs from a previous solution that are displayed in the literature by some extra factor. This one that what's the x and the y, they are directly related to the scale factor of the metric. That's a term that vanish on the symmetry wall. At level 1, things are a little bit more complicated. We obtain a subset of two-dimensional solutions that are also completely defined by this set of equations. This solution, this two-dimensional subspace, are new solution. Indeed, in the literature, on previous work, there was claim, wrongly maybe, that there is no solution with odd number of fermionic number. When I say maybe, it's because I think that's related to actually the fact that first we have taken into account all the power of the fermionic field, and also it's related, I suppose, to the way the operator and the ordering has been defined. So that's just what I said. More interesting at level 2, it's a 15-dimensional space. There are solutions of the, it looks like the previous one, some completely defined function, but there also exists a subspace, a 6-dimensional subspace, whose component has to satisfy some Maxwell-like equation that are written in. The important point is that this equation now allows dynamical solution. The solutions are not completely fixed, but they depend on initial data in the space of the, on the Minkowski space of the beta scale factor. And this set of equations split, as for the usual Maxwell equation, in constraint equation with dot time derivative and evolution equation. And when we analyze them in detail, what we obtain is that this subspace of solution is depend on two arbitrary functions that has to satisfy some constraint equation that is just an Euler-Darboux-Poisson equation. And so once they have been fixed, we could, in principle, compute their propagation in the beta space. Okay. At level 3, there is a similar analysis. The 20-dimensional space split into 10 plus 10, and we also have there more that propagate in terms of the beta variables. Next, level 4, 5, and 6. Once we have solution at the first level, we obtain solution at this level 4, 5, and 6 just by replacing x, y, and z by minus x, minus y, and minus z. That means that in particular, I forget to mention that, but at the first level, the solution was decreasing for large value of the scale factor. So when we change the sign, they become increasing, and so we could say that they are not physically relevant. So to summarize, that's the structure of the space of solution. It's a 64-dimensional space. The empty dot represents non-propagating mode, and the colored dot represents mode that depends on arbitrary function and that are thus physically propagating mode. Now, to put into evidence the hidden symmetry, we have to look what happens near the singularity, and the idea was to replace the various exponential of the W of beta linear form in beta, for instance, beta 1 minus beta 2 and things like that, is to replace this exponential term by sharp wall. So for instance, an exponential is represented by this sharp wall, and 1 over the hyperbolic sine squared, which looks like this, is represented by such a sharp wall. And if we are on one side, you cannot cross across the barrier, and you have to remain on the sides. That's the main idea of Belinsky, Kalatnikov, and Lifshitz. And so in this beta space, you obtain the following structure in terms of sharp wall. So it's valid near infinity in terms of beta. That means near the singularity. There are various walls. And in Lorentzian spaces, there are symmetry walls due to the factor 1 over hyperbolic sine square, and gravitational walls that are just exponential. Now, with respect to this wall, the more the dynamic become very simple. Far from the wall, you have a free motion, and when you hit a wall, there's a reflection on the wall. And if you compute the matrix that govern this reflection, what you obtain is these matrices that maybe remind you something. Matrices with 2 on the diagonal looks like a Cartan matrices, but that's a Cartan matrices, a Lorentzian one. Indeed, the Cartan killing metric is the metric of this Lorentz space of the beta coordinate. And that's the corresponding Dynking diagram. It is not usual, but it's actually the Dynking diagram of a Coxeter hyperbolic group. I will describe it a little bit with a little bit more detail. No, what is Kac-Moody algebra that correspond to such diagram? We have just to think about the usual SU2 group, and we generalize what is well known for the SU2 group. There is a Cartan matrices with 2 on the diagonal. The non-diagonal entry are negative integer, and the rule is that if one entry is 0, the symmetric one with respect to diagonal is also 0. Moreover, technical assumption that I will not discuss anymore here is that the Cartan matrices can be re-expressed in terms of a diagonal matrices and a symmetric one. And once we have all this data, the associate Lie algebra is completely defined. There are Cartan subalgebra. As usual, the commutation relation of the lowering and rising operator with the Cartan generator. The commutation relation between rising and lowering operator that are 0 except when the index correspond and they define a Cartan generator. And that's the more important one, the commutation relation between the rising operator between themselves or the lowering operator between themselves. And so what we obtain as a root space, the Cartan killing metric is Lorentzian, and all root could be expressed as a linear combination of simple root associated with each node of the oh, I forget the name now, I'm a little bit tired, of the diagram. So when alpha 1 is 0, if you forget about this, so that's just the SL3 algebra in terms of real algebra, or if you prefer SU3, but we are working with a real algebra, so in this context it's better to think about SL3. There are the 2 simple root, alpha 2 and alpha 3, corresponding to this node, and they define, if you take into account the Cartan subalgebra, A plus 1 representation of SL3R. Then we could add the third simple root alpha 1, we are at level 1. And what we obtain in the root space at this level, it's 3 roots that are outside the null cone. So that's 3 space-like roots. But also 3 roots that are on the null cone. That's different from the usual semi-simple Cartan Lie algebra. And that corresponds to a 6-dimensional representation of SL3R. Then when we go at level 2, things become more rich and a little bit more complicated. We obtain, again, 6 space-like root, but 3 null root on the light cone, and now time-like root that are inside the null cone and that are degenerate. I remind you that for the usual semi-simple Cartan Lie algebra, the roots are never degenerate. So that's allowed to define positive root, and taking the reflected one with respect to the origin of the space, you obtain the negative root and the complete set of root of this algebra, which is the famous AE3 Kac-Moody algebra. Now, orthogonal to the root, there are planes that define the Weyl chamber. I remind you that the Weyl group are a reflection group with respect to plane orthogonal to the root. So there are alpha 2 and alpha 3 that are level 0 root. The gradation was with respect to alpha 1. And there are 2 plane orthogonal to this root that define the symmetry wall. And also orthogonal to alpha 1, there is the gravitational wall. We cover in this root space the same structure as the one we obtained from the DeWitt metric for the scale coefficient of the metric. Moreover, on the Kac-Moody algebra, there is a Chevalley involution, something quite simple that respects the commutation relation. And that's allowed to define at the algebraic level a maximally compact subalgebra in the same way that for the usual, for instance, SL group, we define the maximally compact subgroup that's just the rotation group given by antisymmetric matrices in the usual case. This is the difference between lowering and rising operator. And from this algebra, we could construct a coset space taking into account exponential of the Cartan subalgebra and operator, positive operator that are not on this maximally compact subalgebra. And the idea is that this coset space, which of course will admit a lot of symmetry, the symmetry of the whole Kac-Moody group, will satisfy a dynamical equation that are close to the cosmological equation. And indeed, if I construct the Cartan invariant form in the usual way, I suppose that all the entries beta and the nu depend on one parameter, let's call them time. What we obtain is a splitting of the Cartan one form into a part that lives in the maximally compact subalgebra and in its complement, and this defines the coset velocity and this part the angular velocity. And from this, for instance, if I look at the 11-dimensional supergravity in the limit where the space-like gradient are negligible in front of the time derivative, there is up to some level a one-to-one correspondence between the equation, the ancient equation, or under this approximation, and the coset equation that I could obtain from this Lagrangian, where the p, so it's just the square of the velocity, and is a factor that describes the independence with respect to the time definition, and in particular because this is a Lagrange multiplier. A consequence of this Lagrange multiplier is that when I vary with respect to n, what I obtain is the constraint that pp is equal to 0. This means that in the space of the p, which is Lorentzian, I remind you, the trajectory will be null trajectory. Moreover, the p satisfy this relation with respect to the rotation velocity. This a spinning particle described by a Grassmann variable psi, which also satisfy a first order equation that involve a spinor vector representation of the rotation velocity. And what we have to know is that the action of this, the representation of this rotation velocity is mainly something spiky about the time of collision on the wall that involve the operator G, which is the difference between rising and lowering operator. It's the G11, G22, and G33 that I introduced previously. For the detail, I suggest that you give a look on the various reference that I mentioned. Now, at the quantum level, I have something similar, but the G11, G22, and G33 becomes operator built with the phi, the Rarita-Schwinger operator. And what we obtain is that this G11, G22, G33 plus the SU2 generator that I already mentioned define a representation of the compact subalgebra of the Kac-Moody AE3 algebra. So what we obtain is in this problem is a 64-dimensional representation of this maximally compact subalgebra of K3, which is an infinite dimensional algebra, on the contrary to what happens for the usual semi-simple Cartan algebra. So what I have is asymptotic, what I know is the asymptotic behavior of the mode propagating far from the wall as mode superposition at level 2 and 3. Far from the wall, they look like plane wave, and I could also analyze the bouncing on the wall, at least far from the corner, in terms of special function of Legendre of Kummer. And the summary of all this analysis is that the spinorial wave function of the universe propagates within the Weyl chamber and reflects on the wall. And in the small wavelength limit, the reflection operator defines a spinorial extension of the Weyl group of A3. What I mean by spinorial extension is that for the usual reflection Weyl group, the square of the operator is equal to 1. In this case, the more complicated relation is the height power of the reflection operator that is equal to 1. That's a kind of new spinorial representation. It's not well known at this point. It still needs investigation, at least physically and mathematics. Now, far from the wall, as I told you, the potential vanish, and the Hamiltonian reduced to a free motion of Hamiltonian, the square of the momenta, and a mass term. This mass term actually was the one that includes the fourth power of the fermionic field. may look very complicated, but actually it's not so complicated, because what we have proved is that is directly related to the square of C, C being the number of fermions minus 3. So this operator actually belongs to the center of the algebra of the compact Kac-Moody subalgebra. We could compute the value of this operator at the various levels, and what you obtain is the number given here. At level 0, it's minus 59 over 8, level 1 minus 3, level 2 minus 3 half, level 1, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 3. At level 3, 1 half, it becomes positive. What does it mean? When it's negative, the equation of motion in this Lorentzian beta space being p squared plus m squared, it corresponds to a space-like trajectory. That is the, if I consider a wave packet, the wave packet is tachyonic in the beta space. So in other words, that the wave packet could turn over and are not obliged, as its classical counterpart, to fall into the singularity, but can go back in some sense into the past, so could avoid the singularity. In case of the trajectory is time-like, what is new with respect to the classical picture is that instead of having a massless particle that already bonds on the wall of the Weyl chamber, at some point, because it's time-like, it didn't bond anymore. That means that, in other words, that the wave packet didn't have forever chaotic motion, but after some collision, it falls directly on the singularity. So the conclusion is just a summary of what I have tried to give you the flavor. We have a three-sphere Bianchi 9 model, and it confirmed the presence of hyperbolic Kac-Moody algebra, Ka3. In this framework, that's what I described, the wave function of the universe is a 64-dimensional Pinot representation that satisfies Dirac-Leck and Klein-Gordon equation, on this space the quantum operator that generates a representation of the compact subalgebra of A3. So we could hope that once we will understand this one, we could go and look at the more interesting but much more complicated case of E10 of 11-dimensional supergravity. So that's what I told you. And maybe that's the also something exciting in this approach. Of course, this approach is in the framework of a mini superspace, so it looks like a Schrödinger equation compared to a full quantum field theory to describe, let's say, the hydrogen atom. But we could hope that there is something true nevertheless in it. And one thing is that due to the quantum correction, the wave function of the universe becomes tachyonic, and so they bounce near the path into a expanding phase and then escape from the singularity, or some other component of this wave function plunge directly into the singularity without any more colliding the wall. And so in the two cases, anyway, the chaotic motion disappears. Now, as I told you, I will give the last word to Robert. And I found a manuscript of Robert about a poem. You know that Robert liked very much poesy. Here is a manuscript. Thanks to the help of Jean-Marie, I made a transcription. I let you to discover what he wrote about the quantum structure of the universe. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, any questions? I forgot to mention earlier on that together with Matt, we decided that for the light refreshment afterwards, we'll have wine. I'll let him say something about what's wine.
Because this gives you a chance to test tartaric acid that Pasteur worked with, not in the pure form, but as a component in wine.
I suppose that's not a question.
Lars, I want to ask a question.
No, but if there are no more questions.
No questions? No.
Okay.
We will ask the expertise in Malaysia. Yes. Yes.
Go ahead. Sure.
That's always questions.
Mark, you know that better than I.
Well, it's a question about the tachyonic case. So when you don't go to the singularity, is it obvious that the approximations you make are still valid because this BKL picture is really in the limit as you go to the singularity? Now,
No, I think it's self-consistent. If I don't go to the singularity, okay, so I escape to the singularity. If I go to the singularity, at some point the tachyonic component will bounce near the path, and then, of course, the structure change. But I have no control of what happens far from the singularity because the sharp wall approximation is not anymore valid. But anyway, I think we could say that for this part of the wave function of the universe in this very simple model, some component avoid the singularity.
No,
if I go too close, they bounce to the path, and if they don't go close, so they never
No, that I understand, but the emergence of the hidden symmetry is related to the BKL approximation, and which is related to going to the singularity. If you don't go to the singularity, you don't have the whole approximation. So where is E10 or AE3?
Okay, no, that's another problem. To obtain this behavior of the wave packet, I didn't need to have the hidden symmetry. It was just an indication that in this framework there are some operator, the S1, the SU2 generator and the G11, etc., that satisfy the commutation relation of the compact part of A3. But I never use explicitly the fact that there is this hidden symmetry. There are two aspects in my talk. One was to describe to, mainly I try to do it for young people, what is this Coset conjecture, and the other one is the resolution of the mini superspace equation for quantum gravity. So for quantum gravity in this framework. So I think that I maintain what I said. I think in the limit of a wave packet, part of the wave function of the universe avoid the singularity. Okay.
This is not what I'm questioning.
Okay.
You can discuss that over a glass of wine later.
Right, let's thank all the speakers for this.